Welcome to The First Dollar, where we interview fascinating founders about the first sales their startup ever made. Welcome to another episode of The First Dollar. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Shane Murphy. He's a YC founder, which is a big deal, has scaled sales from $500,000 to $5 million at a previous company, and has been founder and CEO of Boostly for 7 years now. Happy anniversary and welcome to the show, Shane.
Yeah, thanks. Super excited to be here. It's crazy to think that it's been 7 years since Bootstrap started, but here we are.
I can imagine that is quite a milestone. Think about a small business lasting 7 years, let alone a startup in this kind of chaotic growth environment that we've been dealing with for the last few years. Now, you've run it for 7, but you didn't enter YC until 2022 and didn't raise a seed round till this year. Congrats on the funding, by the way, and that's a big deal. Talk to us about those milestones and why they fell when they did in the history of the company.
Yeah, for sure. When we first started Boostly, it happened faster than I expected, and it was somewhat on a whim. I'd been running sales for a restaurant operations software company called Jolt. And we'd gone through a really awesome, like, little over a year of scaling and just had some exponential growth. And that was my first experience with restaurants. I had always planned on starting a company. Initially was planning to kick that down the road a little bit, ride Jolt for a good solid 5 to 8 years. There was a point where my wife and I were talking and I had these ideas and my wife was like, "You should start a company." I said, "Yeah." It's like, "No, I think you should do it tomorrow." So the next day, I went and told Jolt, "Hey, in a few months, I'm gonna go start a company. Let's start that process." And when I left to start Boostly, we took the bootstrapping route. So we bootstrapped from late 2017 up until the summer of 2022. We were about to raise a round of capital. At that point, we got into YC and did YC through the summer, raised a small amount of capital at the end of the batch, and then raised a full seed round after another awesome year of growth here at the beginning of this year. So we are like kind of bootstrappers by trade. I've always run a really lean operation focused on sales and funding our own success. That's just been our history.
That's incredible. And it's quite an accomplishment. I know that funding is a double-edged sword. There's some awesome opportunity that comes with taking in capital injection into the business. There's also some risk, and there's an accountability that you typically only have to customers and employees. And now you've got customers, employees, and the triumvirate, you've got the investors now. But there's always those inflection points where a company can make that decision. I love that you made it later on. You were able to get through a certain phase of the business and have this healthy period where you're now able to say, look, capital is going to take us to the next level rather
Sure.
than, hey, capital is going to prove whether we have a business or not. So it's fun to think about the founder who might be listening, thinking, I've been running this for a couple of years. Yeah, we've got some sales, but how do we take it to the next level? Was there a particular tipping point for you that you said, okay, this is what capital is going to do. Now we need to go raise? Or was there anything in your mind that you said, once we hit this milestone, we're going to go take on outside capital? What was that decision point?
I remember some days in the early moment, hey, should we raise capital or not? And there were times when we'd ask ourselves, if we raised $1 million today, what would we do with that money? And we didn't have a good answer.
Mm,
Um, we didn't have product market fit yet. In fact, we had things telling us that, hey, maybe we don't have product market fit yet. And that screamed to us, it's not the right time to raise capital. Like, raising capital for us was not a means to survive. It was a means to accelerate growth and the product market fit that we had already validated and accomplished. Whereas in those early years, it was always feeling like we're not there yet. We haven't really cracked the code. And what would I do with $1 million? I don't know, hoard it, because it's going to be a terrible expense if we just deploy it prematurely. But when we first raised capital during YC, we were at a spot where it's like, hey, we really feel like we have product market fit. We're approaching 1 million in annual revenue. How do we accelerate this? We used that to grow during the batch. That gave us our first taste of what could actually happen when we raised capital. And that if we could get the right people involved in the company, it would just accelerate us much, much faster. So that was our first element, was scale sales a little bit, but keep that pretty lean, but start getting the key like leadership drivers who are going to take us to the next level into the company. And then this year when we raised our additional capital, now it's all about scaling from there.
I love the idea of asking ourselves the responsible growth question of, we raised 1 million right now, what would we do with it? And is the answer blindingly obvious, or is it we have to work at figuring out how to deploy that capital? And if it's blindly obvious, you might be at that inflection point. That's fascinating. The show's called The First Dollar, and we invited you here to talk about some of the first sales you remember making. 7 years is it's like 1 million years in startup plan. So if you can think that far back, if you can recall the first people to put a little bit of trust and faith in you, actually hand you a dollar, right? Actually pay the invoice. Thinking back that far, it probably would behoove us to give a little context into what Boostly does. Give us a quick overview of the product and maybe where it was 7 years ago versus where it is today.
Yeah, so I'll start with today,
Sure.
and it'll be very different from when we started. Today, Boostly is an SMS marketing hub for restaurants. So you think of your favorite local like pizza chain, they would use Boostly to build an opt-in list of all their customers and then text out promotions and offers and incentives to get you back in more frequently to that restaurant and specifically do the marketing based on how you engage with the brand. So if you hadn't been there in 3 months, but one of your buddies is coming every few weeks, you both will get very different types of marketing built to drive you towards engaging with that brand. And that's what we are today. But when we started, it was right at the beginning of the online ordering craze. Like online
Yeah.
ordering was huge.
Pandemic, man. We were all ordering during the pandemic.
Yeah, so this was like mid 2017 and we looked at what was happening in the market, thought everyone is focused on just transmitting the order data to the restaurant so they can make the food processing a payment. But there was all of this customer data under the hood that could be used for marketing. And so the initial concept of Boostly, what we actually built first was an online ordering system that had some built-in marketing tools. And even before that, the idea was this marketplace where you could place an online order from any of the local restaurants and at the same time track all of your loyalty points in a single place. And so what I began doing was I went out to just validate these ideas. And I just started cold calling restaurants and I started in the air. So I could just physically go knock on doors.
Yeah, good for you.
I started meeting with these different restaurants and kept changing the idea a little bit from meeting to meeting. My pitch deck would change. It was just an idea on some slides and some like mock-ups that I made. Hey, this is what it might look like. The first sale that I actually had was for a company called Medici Neapolitan Pizza. I was sitting down, getting to know their business, asking a bunch of questions, and showing them the idea that I was working on, asking for a bunch of feedback. Every single time, it was also a sales opportunity because the true form of validation for me was, is somebody going to pay me money? And oh, yeah, that sounds great. I took this marketplace idea to the owner at Medici and he's like, this is great in theory. How many like consumers are on the marketplace? The answer was none.
Yeah.
I had the classic marketplace chicken and egg problem
Yep.
where the consumers would join once there were a bunch of restaurants, and the restaurants would join once there were a bunch of consumers. And so, in the course of this conversation, I was talking with the owner, and they had recently opened and they were trying to grow. And as part of their opening, the guy was like giving out free pizzas on his opening day. And it had been a while since they had opened, but he had this stack of free pizza coupons. And I said, hey, what if I were to bring you traffic? I will go hustle up the consumers and I will bring them in. Would that be a way that you could test this out and see how this would work? And he's like, I'd be interested in that. Here's a stack of a couple hundred free pizza coupons and go see what you can do with it. And so I went to like the local college campuses and essentially in exchange for a survey and people joining my mailing list and giving me feedback on the app, I would give them this free pizza coupon to Medici and drive people over to their store. And because it had been a while since they had opened, they knew that any of these new pizza coupons coming in were from me.
Yeah.
And eventually, I decided this isn't the idea to launch. This isn't going to work. Let's pivot. And so I changed the idea to a direct online ordering system that you throw up on the restaurant's website. There's no marketplace, and we built some marketing tools on top of it. And I took that back to that owner at Medici and essentially said, "Hey, here's what we're gonna build. We've changed the idea, and this is how it's gonna impact your business. What I'm gonna do is, if you're interested, I'll give you just pay for the first month in a setup fee, and then I'll give you 6 months for free. Then it renews on an annual contract, 12 months. You just give me your billing information today and sign this agreement. I won't bill you until we finish the product and you can actually use it. Are you
Nice.
in?" And he said, "Yes." Signed the agreement. I walked away with a voided check. Like a week later, I went to like a Brazilian restaurant, gave him the same pitch and deal, and they said yes. And I got like a handful of those, and then I was like, "Okay, I think I really need to go get a co-founder." Got a co-founder. We started actually building the product and launch a few months later. One of the other interesting sales of how we validated this was there was a company in Salt Lake City, Utah called Este Pizza.
Okay.
And I found them because I was looking up like a competitor's website. I went to their website and they had a testimonial right on the front page, and it was for Este Pizza in Salt Lake City, Utah. And the idea that we were launching was this online ordering system with these other marketing tools built on top. And these people loved Chow Now, and Chow Now is an amazing online ordering system. If Estate Pizza, who loves Chow Now, would get rid of their really good ordering system and swap it for our like MVP pre-product version, just for the access to these marketing tools, then I really know we're onto something.
Yeah.
And so I walked in, I cold called the restaurant, got a hold of the owner, set up a meeting, and pitched them the idea, and they're like, "Yeah, if you build that, we are so in." Got the voided check, got the agreement, and that gave me confidence that, hey, we are building something that people actually want, they need, and they're willing to have a poorer, like, experience with a kind of a buggy system in order to get what they want. And that's how Boostly started. A bunch of pre-sales. I think we ended up to about like 10 pre-sales before we actually launched the actual product and took it live. And then we just kept selling from there until we pivoted a year and a half later.
That's a fascinating story. I love how much work you put into validating your idea and that you weren't afraid to ask for money for it. Because I think there's a lot of founders that a founder listening right now is going to say, yeah, I'm already doing those interviews. I'm having those conversations. But at the end, we all feel good that we all agree this sounds like a good product, but I'm not asking for money. So I think
Yeah.
that is a clear checkpoint in that relationship. Hey, would you give me a voided check? Would you? And I remember asking for that voided check is like, hey, we're all friendly until it comes to the voided check moment,
Yep.
right? Hey, it all sounds good and fine until we say it's going to increase your payment and here's what that looks like. And do you have your checkbook handy? That's the moment of truth. So I love that you got there. I'm sure digitally there are more things now than a voided check that give us that same kind of visceral feeling of, yes, we've gotten something. But I know there's a founder out there listening who's doing the interviews, but not asking for the money. And this is your reminder, ask for the money, see what they're willing to do. I like your payment terms, the concept of, hey, sign up for a little bit now. I'll give you a bunch of time and then we'll launch. I have a customer of mine at No Fluff Selling where they launched an early product. They kind of pre-sold a bunch of the product and said, hey, this is a contract. It's a real contract. But if we don't complete on our end product to satisfaction, we'll never roll out and this will turn into a pumpkin. And that little phrase of, hey, it'll just turn into a pumpkin. This is not a thing if it's not a thing
Yep.
really made it easier for people to say, yeah, I'm willing, but you have to hold up your end of the bargain. So I think that's a nice little nugget for anybody listening. How did you have the courage to do all those cold calls? I know you have a sales track record, like you had been in sales before, but this is just you. It was just you. And of course, a huge shout out to your wife for supporting you so much in that moment of like, hey, go for it. And then it's you alone though making the calls. So how did you have that courage to go out and talk to strangers and do this?
We had been planning to build a company in the future. We were socking away funds so that we could go without getting paid for a number of years. And that relieved a little bit of the pressure and stress, but it was still like game on. Like when your bank account goes down every month for years, the game is on and you have to figure it out. And so that was part of the motivating factor for me. I have to figure this out. I am going to force this thing into success, at least into its first version of success, knowing I'm probably going to have to pivot along the way. That was the motivating factor.
Obviously, you were planning to build a business. There's something about you that said, "I'm going to build a business." What was that? Was it as a child early on? Were you selling Pokemon cards to your friends? What was it that was getting you on this track that you knew that you should save money so you can go for years without? And that's a confidence leading into this thing that probably set you up for success. Where did that start?
I grew up in a family that was very poor. Our answering machine in our basement was back when there were like tapes machines. Kids these days, teenagers won't understand. We used to have cassette tapes that were our answering machines, and ours in our basement was filled with debt collectors. And I remember my dad like going downstairs, opening it up, not even listening, just flipping it over, recording over all the debt collectors. That was the life that we had growing up. And it was really like a challenging financial environment. And so I grew up wanting two things really bad when I was a kid. I wanted money and I wanted like a better family life for my future family.
Sure.
And those were like the two motivating factors for me. I was always selling something as a kid. Like from hacky sacks at school, I'd buy them at the soccer zone for $3. I'd sell them at school for 5. I sell like soda out of my locker and buy it at my mom's bus garage for 25 cents, sell it for $1 at school. I would loan kids out lunch money and they pay me like double the next day. And I was always doing things to make money. And there was a point I never really realized, hey, someday I want to be an entrepreneur. That never crossed my mind until later in life when I actually had started my career. But when I was a kid, it was all about how do I make a buck? And there was a moment middle school when my buddies and I we had started this little jazz band. My friend's mom had a birthday party and her boyfriend like hired our little kid like
Hey,
and to come and play and paid each of us $50. I remember I was like, "Man, I made $50 in 3 hours. That was awesome." It was probably like 2 hours. How do I do this again? And so a very similar thing is this like really tiny pimple faced, like 13, 14-year-old. I was like, I bet I can go talk to businesses and they'll hire us for a company party. Put on this overgrown suit coat, started going to these businesses. And I think I got a ton of pity sales where they're like, oh, this kid is cute. I would go and say, hey, I have this jazz band. This is what we do. Here's a CD of our music. So
yeah,
you can vet it. And I started getting these gigs where people would hire our band and people would graduate. We do like graduation parties. And then after doing that for a year, there was a day where I booked 2 gigs at the same time. And it was a total accident. I didn't keep track. I booked 2 gigs right over each other, and I was like, "Oh, man, can't be in 2 places at once." So I went to our local college. They had a great jazz program there. I asked one of the jazz professors, "Hey, do you have any people who could play a gig? I'll pay them each $100." And he's like, "Yeah." And he walked me up the hall and, "Hey, anybody want a gig?" And all these college kids are like, "Yeah." And then I was like, "Oh, I can do this more often." I got really good at booking these gigs. And eventually, like the last couple of years of high school, I turned it into a business. I didn't realize it was a business at the time until taxes came, but I was booking these gigs, reselling them to musician area. And I did that for 3 years and built up this really good side hustle for a kid my age. Later on in life, I started school as a music major, decided I was better at the business side than the music side,
yeah.
and then realized sales is really what I wanted to do. I joined a super early stage startup and got exposure to entrepreneurship. I got exposure to what it meant to buy some equity and see what that can become if you sell the company. That experience at that startup totally changed my career trajectory of I'm going to be the best salesperson on the planet and make a ton of money through sales to I want to go build something. I want to create something. I want to help other people to grow through the process of building. And that's what eventually led me down the path of becoming an entrepreneur.
Amazing. Started with being a little kid with a jazz band and a little dream in your heart. I think it's going to resonate with a lot of founders who are listening. Let's say quick rapid fire, last couple of questions here. What's a tool or resource you wish you had known about when you were starting out?
I think it's one that when I'm talking to new founders, they haven't heard of, and it's one of the most powerful ones to go start this sales process. There's a database in a company called Data Axle. They used to be known as like Reference USA.
Yeah.
And essentially, with Data Axle, you can search almost every business, at least every brick and mortar business, but it has e-commerce and things on there too in the US and Canada. And it has the address, the phone number. Half of the time, it'll have the owner's name tied to it. And this is a database that anyone can access through their public library for the most part.
Amazing. That's fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Last question. What's a book that you'd recommend to a founder? I see you got a bunch of books behind you. You seem like a reader.
If you're a founder, one that I would highly recommend is Do More Faster. This was written by Brad Feld and David Cohen. They're the founders of Techstars. It is just 100 to 200 examples of founders and what they learned through trying to start their company, like good lessons and bad lessons.
Shane, you've been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on the show. If people want to connect with you, where do you prefer?
LinkedIn is the best way to connect with me, for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Shane. And there you have it, another first dollar in the books. Thanks for tuning in, and a huge thank you to our guests for sharing their story. If you enjoyed this episode, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with a fellow founder, leave us a review, or hit us up on LinkedIn. Want more startup insights and strategies? Head over to foundersales.com, where we're helping technical founders turn their innovations into thriving businesses. Until next time, keep hustling for that next dollar.